Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. One of the reasons I don't have a title for the paper actually is that I wasn't given one when I was asked to speak. So in a way that gives me a little bit of license to talk about what the hell I want, I suppose. But in reality I think what it's going to be is a bit of a state of the nation type of address. As far as the egg market and egg issues are concerned. And even though I know you're a free range audience today, when I start talking about the market, I think we need to talk about the whole market, because the free range market doesn't work in isolation, it's part of the whole market. And I think we've had some really massive changes in this last couple of years, unprecedented changes in my lifetime really, because of the Welfare Directive, which have had a major effect on the market. I think it's important to try and understand what happened and where we are now. First with the good news. Egg consumption in the UK is rising and has been consistently rising over the last 10 years. 12.3% in the last 11 years. That's got to be good news because that means more consumers buying more of our product. However, even though it's growing, 182 per capita total consumption last year, 2012, is still quite low by European standards. Ireland is the only country, Republic of Ireland is 165, so they're below us, but probably the European average is somewhere in the 210, 215 mark. So I would say that's good so far, but a bit like the school report, more can be done. These figures you probably know, but this is actually just the production base in the UK. That's sourced from BFREPA and it's up to date as of September. And you saw it on a previous slide, in fact. So the production base in the UK at the minute is just over 50% colony, a little bit of barn, a little bit of organic, and then the rest of it is free range, 44% free range. So still at the moment free range not quite the biggest sector, although we used to predict that it's going to take over. And I think it probably still will in due course. Of those eggs we eat, the 182, where do they go? Well, 53% of them are purchased through retail as shell egg. So that's our biggest and most important market. And of course it's also probably the most valuable market we're talking about. The rest of the eggs though don't just disappear. 22% of them go into processing to end up in a food product, which then will be sold through retailers, whether it's a quiche or pasta or whatever it might be. And then 25% of eggs go through what we call the food service sector, which is where we're eating eggs out. It could be in a hotel for breakfast, it could be McDonald's, or it could be the greasy spoon in the lay-by, who knows. What's important is when you look at those different three sectors, what eggs feature in which sector. In the retail sector, already, free range is the dominant category, 52.3% of the sector. Now these were figures actually for 2012. So already free range is biggest in the retail sector. And then relatively small amounts, as we know, of organic and barn, the balance being colony. When you go to the other two sectors, food service and processing, then these are both very much cage-dominated or colony-dominated sectors. And to be honest, probably ever likely to remain so because they're much more price-driven sectors. In processing, it is quite significant. Free range is there at 26.5%. The people who want free-range liquid egg, it started with Marks and Spencer, who only sell any product made from eggs in a Marks and Spencer store is free range. And then been copied by some of the other retailers, so Waitrose own label, Co-op own label would also be made from free range, for example. And you've also got some big branded food manufacturers who want free range. And the one I was using an example here is Hellman's mayonnaise, which is made from free range egg. So that sector is growing and can still grow, but it's very much price competitive. Look into food service though, and then you really are into the few and far between who are selling free range eggs. And it's just one or two key names there in the food service sector who are selling free range. Examples I would cite are McDonald's, because you go to McDonald's and all the eggs used in McDonald's restaurants in the UK is free range. And Pret a Manger in sandwiches, another area where we've got free range penetration. So, going back a year, at the beginning of last year, which is when the Welfare Directive came into effect, and this was an estimate from a European organisation as to the number of laying hens in Europe and how many of those hens were in illegal conventional cages on the 1st of January last year. And the figure is about 80 million, around about 23% of the European flock. Now at that point in time, we expected a really big problem in terms of competition. In the European context, the UK is the 6th largest egg producer. There are 5 member states larger than us. One of those member states is Germany. Now, they fully complied with the directive 2 years early, because they're in Germany, in their national legislation, they gold-plated the legislation, so they already ticked, they were done. But of the other 4 member states who were larger than us, this was our estimate at the beginning of 2012 of how much illegal production there was out there. And it's mega. It was really significant. Biggest offenders, Spain, Italy, Poland, all of those industries, probably only half of them were compliant. France was down at about a quarter. Now at that point of time, we just of course expected that we were going to be flooded in the UK with non-compliant egg. It isn't actually what happened, but that's what we thought. And now just a quick word on EU action on non-compliance, because the directive, the welfare directive, is actually an instruction to member states to pass national legislation to bring that directive into effect. It is not Brussels' job to police that legislation. It is actually the member states' responsibility to do it. So in terms of enforcement of directives, what can Brussels do if it doesn't happen? What they can do is they take individual member states. It's not producers who are in the dock, it's the member state who is taken to court eventually. It's called infraction proceedings. And it's a long process, unfortunately. It's a 2 or 3 year process. And eventually it can lead to member states in front of the European Court of Justice getting mega fines. And I am talking about mega amounts of money, hundreds of millions of pounds it could be here, that a member state gets fined for not enforcing a directive. Well, the one thing that the EU did promise us was that they would fast-track the infraction process. Well, it's 2 years after the 1st of January 2012, almost, so fast-track is a bit of a loose word, I think, in EU terms. But they did start proceedings against 13 member states, so like half the member states had some degree of non-compliance at the start of last year. But this is what caught us all on the hop, though. What nobody expected was this massive market disruption in Easter last year, not Easter this year, Easter 2012. And the reason it happened was because 2 of those member states where there was a large amount of non-compliance, and I'm talking about Spain and France in particular, suddenly started to crack down on their producers who were producing illegal eggs, and they forced out of production tens of millions of birds. That, of course, just sent absolute shockwaves right through the European market. And that's why the prices went sky high, absolutely through the roof in Easter last year. And you've got this crazy situation where wholesale prices were far higher than retail prices at that time. As far as continuing non-compliance, well, by the end of last year, Brussels was saying that about 20 million hens still illegal in 5 member states. And even now, nearly 2 years on from the deadline, there are 2 member states who are still in the dock for non-compliance, and that's Italy and Greece. So even today, there will be a small amount of non-compliant production somewhere in Brussels, in Europe. So where does that lead us to? Well, what we've got is fewer, larger colony farms. In the UK, virtually all those farms are now in line, and they've all been completed in the last 3 years. We have approximately 70 colony farms in the UK, producing all the egg that we need. One of the things that probably it tickles me a little bit, or I chuckle about it, is the driver for the welfare directive was, of course, animal welfare organisations having a go at Brussels saying things needed to change. And did they realise that their action actually would cause the biggest consolidation in the industry we've seen? Because that's actually what's happened. And it's an unseen thing. I bet you hadn't realised that over 60% of cage producers in the UK retired as a result of welfare directive. That's actually what's happened. And yet we've still got a similar number of birds. And the big thing was, the big change was, a lot of businesses just took the opportunity to retire because they hadn't got succession in place, i.e. sons and daughters who wanted to come in and take that business on. So those people left the industry. The people who did remain, where there was succession and where they wanted to invest, of course, have all got bigger. So we've now got a lot of very modern farms producing colony eggs in the UK. And you can imagine that what happened here in the UK has really been replicated throughout the rest of Europe as well. As far as free range is going, well, we've got over 1,000 free-range commercial farms in the UK, and most of those have been completed fairly recently. I put 5 years on the slide, probably that's a bit overly generous because there hasn't been much expansion for good reasons in the last couple of years, but certainly if you said in the last 10 years, you have encompassed most of the farms. So what we've got is probably an industry where all the farming base is the best we've seen for a long, long time, forever really. as we said there, best equipped layer farms that we've ever had. So here's the problem. Where do we go next as an industry if free range continues to grow? Those numbers I showed you about free range, that's where we are now. Free range had grown for the last 15 years at significant levels. It did stop in 2012, and I'll come on to that in a minute. It could be back in growth again. If it carries on growing, where do we go? Because it's unthinkable, isn't it, that someone would shut down a new farm. And that's really the issue. In the olden days, as we were changing the industry, bear in mind, you go back to the 1980s, the industry was 100% cage. So you'd always got old cage farms that were happy to take out as free range came in. That isn't the case anymore. What we've got is very new farms, and who's going to want to shut one of those down if free range is still growing? The good thing, or the get out of jail card, is probably our self-sufficiency. If you look at these numbers, then in the UK, you can see there that we're, on average, we're about 85% self-sufficient in eggs and egg products. And the imports that come in, we used to say it was 50-50, but actually when you look at the imports and export data for 2012, then it's an increasing amount of shell egg product, liquid egg products coming in, rather than the egg shell itself. And it was 40% in shell in 2012, 60% products. If you look at the INPEX data for 2013, it's down to about 30% coming in as shell and about 70% coming in as products. And of course, most of the imports are cage egg, and that's quite important to remember. So, in my mind anyway, import substitution was potentially the get out of jail card for future market change in the UK. However, that doesn't apply to the whole of Europe. And in Europe as a whole, if we've got structural oversupply, in Europe as a whole there's imbalance in eggs. So there isn't that sort of get out of jail card. All you can do is perhaps grow your way out of it in terms of growing consumption. This is a chart on UK egg self-sufficiency. The blue line at the bottom is a projection of the UK flock size. Yeah. And unlike some people who tend to use 12-month rolling averages on chick placings, which I think we should throw away because they're totally wrong, and that's not what the UK flock size is. Because of course we all know that our laying cycle is 13 to 14 months on the farm. So what you've got to do is take the chick placings and project them on as if you'd take them through a flock and slaughter at 72. But that gives the sort of the UK bird number, and you can see how the bird numbers dropped down significantly in 2012 when we were short of colony, because colony units were still being built, they hadn't all been completed. We complied with the directive, but we were short of colony egg at that time. And then how the flock sizes increased. And then if you take the import-export data, and then I calculate it back into how many birds would it take to produce those eggs, what you really see is we're eating the eggs of about 40 to 41 million birds. I think we've got to smooth that top line out, because that's just taking on the month that those imports come in. There are no dried egg powder producers in the UK, for example, and powders, of course, have got a shelf life of 2 years. So if you're buying powder, you don't necessarily buy it in the month and use it. You'll be buying it strategically when you think it's going to be cheap, and putting it into stock and using it as you need it. Some of that egg as well could come in to be broken by processors over here. So I think what you have to do is smooth that line out. But you can see we actually have a fairly stable consumption. And it is quite clear from those numbers that if we produce more at home and the flock size is big, we import less. If we produce less at home, we import more. And it's really as simple as that. There's no great shocks in those numbers. The one thing that did surprise us, however, was these are, I would have to say, are revised numbers, because the original data that came out of DEFRA implied a very big surge in imports in Easter of 2012. Some people in the industry say, the industry's on the fiddle and it's all this and the other. Load of bloody rubbish. There's nothing to do with that. What probably more serious analysis of that information, however, was to say, hang on a minute, if those data say there's going to be all these imports, where could they have come from? Because this problem wasn't just in the UK, it was right across Europe, so where was the egg going to arise from? So as BEIC, we had a few meetings with DEFRA's statistics branch, and particularly on the import and export data. It's not DEFRA who collect the data, it's actually customs, it's HMRC. DEFRA just sort of collate it and put it out in their extracts numbers. Anyway, top and bottom of it was that after a few meetings we discovered that actually the way they calculated their data was just wholly wrong in terms of shell egg imports and exports. They were taking the value and dividing it by a constant number, which was 36p a dozen, and saying that was the volume that came in. And of course that was absolute rubbish when the volumes were, when the prices were going sky high. We then sat down with them and worked out a better way of doing it, which they're now doing by an accurate method using actual volumes, and then restated all the data. And then you see a much more stable situation as on the graph there. So that's a picture of the market for you, and then I just wanted to have some thoughts about where we go forward on eggs within that sort of overall context of the market. And I just want to cover off each of these headings. Firstly, talking about balancing supply and demand. Well, I think you'd agree with me that you've really got to think of the market as two parts. It's free range and colony, and they're separate issues. As far as free range is concerned, what we really need in the UK is to be self-sufficient, but no more than self-sufficient. And when we have too much free range, we know what that means. We've got poor prices and all the rest of it. With colony, it's slightly different because there is this business about import and substitution if we overproduce here at home. What we can do as BEIC, and what we've been working on this year, is to improve the amount of the quality of market data that we give out to people for them to make their decisions on. What we can't have and ever have in a competitive market, because it's totally illegal, is any form of quota system of production. That is the absolute no-no. But what an industry association could do and can do is improve the quality of the information for the individual businesses then to pick up and use as they see fit. Firstly, on chick placings, the figures come out. There's only 4 hatcheries in the UK now contributing to those placings, but you get them out of BFREPA. Usually it's about a month and a half after it's happened. And we're working with the hatcheries through the Public Hatcheries Association to get that information out. Really, you can have it at the end of the month. The information was already there, so we can get that information out more quickly. At the same time, and we've never had this before, and this is really more important, I think, is actually asking the hatcheries to provide data back to BEIC as to where those birds are going. At the moment, it's being split just between colony and alternatives. We're not getting as clever as to sort of say barn, free range, organic, but it'll just give us a feel for where those birds are going. And you really need sort of a full 13-month cycle before it makes any valuable information that we can use. But that is already being built up. And at the same time as well, each month we then pull off the line database the flock sizes that we have, again by system type. And there's 2 figures there. One is the capacity, because when you put a bird shed up, it has so much capacity. And then there's the actual flock, because the bird's house doesn't always equal the capacity of the shed. And also, of course, you've got birds that are out of production in turnaround, which would reduce the actual birds alive. Often in sport, people talk about football as a game of 2 halves. And really this is a little bit like that. And I'm just going to talk about the egg market now. This is the retail section, so bear in mind it's only half the eggs we eat, but it's again the most valuable. And instead of it being 2 halves of a year, it's actually 2 years, and that's 2012 and 2013. And it's a busy chart, but the blue line on the chart is really the growth, plus or minus, there's 0. So that's showing growth and then decline. And the red bars are the actual values, and these are straightforward values of eggs sold. Now this is starting with colony. I've already mentioned Easter last year, and you can see there that massive spike in growth it was seen from retail. Now, a lot of that wasn't real growth. What was actually happening was that because the wholesale prices were so high and above retail prices, which is a very curious part of the market, a lot of businesses that would normally have bought eggs from wholesale, this could be any sort of small food business, hotels, you name it, were buying their eggs from retail. As an industry on colony, for those retailers that sell colony, we do a 30-egg bulk pack. Sales of that bulk pack went just through the roof. And that was clearly people switching channel. They would have bought from a wholesaler, they're now buying retail. And suddenly you see sort of retail in growth. When you look at this year for colony, what you do see is what high prices. There hasn't been much promotion on colony egg this year for whatever reason. And what we've seen as a result is now the retail sector of colony now declining. 2-fold, I think. One is because wholesale prices are much lower, so those people who switch channel just go back to buying their eggs from the wholesale market and not from retailers. And the high prices that have been there were really sort of deflecting sales off colony this year. If you look at the same chart for free range over 2 years, then a very different scenario. When that big market disruption happened in Easter 2012, all the packers used it as the reason to force the retailers to pay more money for their eggs. We'd had a massive increase in food costs, as you all know as producers, in the end of 2011, and we haven't been able to pass that through to the retailers, nor, of course, back to you. But as soon as the market went short, that was the opportunity. Bang, get the prices up, and that's exactly what happened. So the retail prices shot up, as you saw there, but of course, what happened to growth? It really hit growth. And for quite a period in 2012, what we had was a situation where there was very little promotion going on, and customers were always seeing the true difference in the value or price at retail level of a cage egg and a free range egg. And clearly that tells you that this market is price sensitive. Switch to this year, and what have we seen? Well, good news is that free range is back in growth, but it's back in growth partly because of discounting, because of price. And on the left there's a couple of examples, one from Morrison's and one from Asda, of the deals that have been driving free range growth this year. It started with the discounters doing £1 for a 6 medium, and virtually everyone's copied it. And that's really what's driving the growth in free range sector this year. Which, it's good news it's growing, but it's got to be a concern for all of us, I would say, because that's not sustainable growth. That's not a price that everyone can make, can do well out of. So we have a bit of a problem there. So, what else can we do apart from market sticks? Well, grow our market. And here, of course, very much I would say, is get behind the lion. The lion, the first chart I showed you was the growth in consumption, up whatever it was, 12% over the last 12 years. That doesn't happen by mistake. As an industry, through the packers who are the subscribers to BEIC, we have spent over £30 million advertising and pushing the lion and eggs generally in the last 15 years. And that's what's driving the consumption. It's not accidental. Of course, the lion started, if you'll remember, and those of you who've got a bit more grey hair in the room will certainly remember it, but maybe some of the newer producers won't. Of course, it came out of the salmonella crisis. And this chart here, what this shows you is the human salmonella incidences as reported in the UK between 1984 and 2010. And you see over on the left there, what we saw was a massive increase in salmonella incidences in the late 1980s. And that's what led to Edwina in December 1988, nearly 25 years ago, saying what she did. She was wrong in what she said, in as much as, yes, there was a problem, but it wasn't the majority of it. So if she'd retracted that statement and changed, she'd probably not have lost her job, but she stayed where she is. And that, of course, but there was a problem in the industry. And the industry at that time, a lot of it was in denial, was saying, no, there isn't a problem. Because, of course, from a producer's point of view, birds with salmonella don't look ill. You don't see any problems, you can't see any problems. It's only when you start testing that you find it's there. But sure enough, it was there. And really now, with hindsight, what we would say is Edwina was very good for us, because she gave the industry a kick up the backside and forced it to do something about it. And perhaps if we hadn't had that disaster of 1988, you wouldn't have had the unison in the industry for everyone to spend all the money we did in terms of getting the product right and then promoting it. And the Lion Code, of course, is not new. We relaunched it with vaccination in 1998. There was a gap, of course, between the problem and the solution. And part of that, of course, was that in 1988 there weren't any vaccines available. You had to have a problem before the animal health companies would develop the vaccines that would sort the problem out. And then, of course, we had to persuade all the industry to use it, which took a little bit of time. And you can see how, as soon as we introduced vaccination in the lion, the problem went away. And we're now down to absolutely record levels. That message is still a very pertinent one today. The lion, way before the National Control Programme, because the National Control Programme on salmonella didn't come out until 2008-9. I suppose what we can do is take a bit of pride in what we did in the lion, in as much as the EU Salmonella Directive for layers more or less followed what we were already doing in the lion anyway. Although even now, there are things that we do under the line that aren't part of the National Control Programme, and that includes all the turnaround hygiene swabbing that you're doing on both rearing farms and laying farms, particularly looking at rodents. And that's really a reminder to people that one of the biggest issues with salmonella is rodents. If you've got a rodent problem on your farm, you will likely have a salmonella problem. And also under the line, we do a lot of testing in packing centres, which aren't required under the National Control Programme at all. That's hygiene swabbing and egg testing. And we've tested about 1.5 million eggs in the last 10 years, all without any positives. But it isn't just about salmonella. We raise a lot of money. I mentioned that we spent, as an industry, we spent about 30 million in the last 15 years promoting eggs. Of course, when there's an opportunity to make it a lion message, we will do it. But by and large, a lot of what we do is actually generic, so it applies to all eggs. And some of the highlights I would pick out there were this campaign here, which was lifting the limits. There were problems relating to egg consumption. One was salmonella. We ticked that box with a line. The next one was cholesterol, much more difficult issue. But as you know, the story has moved on cholesterol. It used to be concerned about the amount of cholesterol you eat, and of course eggs do have quite a lot of cholesterol in them. But now the issue that people have realised isn't the cholesterol you eat, it's saturated fat that you eat, because that is what controls how much circulating cholesterol you have. Now we've got the British Heart Foundation to change their message on egg consumption. They used to have a limit saying you shouldn't eat more than 2 eggs a week. That limit is now gone, it's been lifted. And, that took a number of years' work. We've got some brilliant news on satiety, which is the role of eggs in making you feel full for longer. And there isn't a diet mentioned nowadays that doesn't feature eggs. I mean, it's been tremendous for us. So that's a very big positive that's been going on in the background. And a new campaign that we're working on at the moment, which I think will also have a very long-term effect in terms of overall egg consumption, is one on allergy. Now, eggs can be allergenic to people who eat them. I mean, in fact, it's quite a common cause of allergy. And what we're working on here is the advice to mothers when they're weaning their children. Because any allergenic food, whether it's an egg or anything else, and what we're finding out is that you should be introducing that food to the child. There's a narrow window about between 4 months and 6 months of age when those eggs should be introduced. Not just eggs or anything else that might cause allergy. If you introduce it later, you actually have an increased risk of allergy. And not only that as well, often mums, because they're sort of aware about allergies, they stop eating eggs while they're pregnant. That's the last thing they should do. You should actually be eating eggs while they're pregnant. Now, at one time, mums were advised not to eat eggs when they're pregnant because of salmonella concerns, but we've sorted the salmonella problem. So this is another area where I think that work going on in the background will lead to more people eating eggs at a younger stage. And of course, you get them young, you get them forever. Because one of the risks you have is people who are growing up who never eat eggs, and that's what we're trying to fight against. So this is all the work that BEIC does, and I think it's very positive in creating a positive background, a positive aura for eggs, within which individual companies within the line can then do their own promotional work. And that's exactly, I think, how trade associations should operate. I was asked to mention a little bit, very quickly, on line version 7. You've all heard about it, I'm sure. It'll be being delivered to you next month, and it will be auditable from February next year. Key changes that we've introduced in the line. Firstly, we've made it compulsory for ST vaccination. Now, most of you anyway would already have been ST vaccinated, but it was a recommendation rather than a requirement. And I think for free-range flocks, you would be absolutely stupid not to vaccinate for salmonella typhimurium anyway, because the reality of typhimurium, the risk here is co-grazing with other livestock which might carry it. So that's why we've put that in. We've withdrawn the derogation to use lacillocid as a coccidiostat. It was banned for a long time in Lyme. Then, because there were problems at one time with the availability of paracox vaccine, it was brought in. But we said we'd only bring it in on a derogation. And what we were watching, of course, was the VMD results in terms of residues in eggs. Unfortunately, there have been some serious residues found again, and this is another area where we could easily shoot ourselves in the foot, so that derogation has been withdrawn. For producers, however, there's still choice. You don't have to vaccinate, although it's a very good product. There are still some in-feed treatments available if you want to use them. We've also, and this is probably the biggest single change, is we're looking now for the first time to record all antibiotic use. If someone came to us at BEIC at the moment and said, how much antibiotic is used in the egg industry, we couldn't give them the answer. We don't honestly know. And that is, in these days, that's becoming unacceptable because antibiotics are becoming a real negative word. Yesterday was Antibiotic Awareness Day, and you probably heard on the radio about this was more in the human field by saying you shouldn't go and ask for antibiotics if you've just got a cold. It doesn't do any good anyway, and it just leads to resistance. What we've done, so one thing is we'll start recording what's being used, and also we've put a ban on certain products which would have been very rarely used anyway, if ever, in the egg industry. And these are the third and fourth generation antibiotics which need to be reserved for severe human cases. And I'm talking here about the fluoroquinolones and cephalosporins. We've heard a lot today as well about feather pecking and cannibalism. And one of the things we've also put in is all these Bristol University feather pecking interventions with a recommendation that producers adopt at least 5 of the different interventions. And just a word on beak trimming. It was mentioned by the previous speaker that some countries had adopted successfully non-beak trimming. I would actually challenge that. As part of the beak trimming action group which I'm on, we went to both Sweden and Austria to look at flocks. And whilst they certainly seem to be managing without the severe incidence of injurious pecking, what we saw was flocks that would be unacceptable in terms of feather cover. If they were in the Daily Mail, we'd have a real problem on our hands. So I don't think that those countries, even those countries, I would challenge the view that they've successfully done it. They've banned it, but I don't think it's altogether successful. And that probably gives you away my prejudice, which says that I don't think we're going to be anything like ready in 2016 either. But then we'll just have to wait and see. Lion passports. At the moment on the passport, it says send the passport into BEIC. But actually, that's not what we want. We want it to go to your packer. And we want it to go back 2 times. Once is when the birds are placed, and the second is when the birds are depleted. And it actually is a non-conformance. The packer should have that passport in place before they start packing your eggs, otherwise it's a non-conformance law. But also, if we're going to help ourselves and improve the market data, it's the passport data that improves the quality of the database. Because when the packers get those passports, that's when they know what the flock size is, when it's gone in, what age it is, and also when it's gone. And far too often, particularly the depletion ones, when I was talking about how many birds we actually got on the ground and the difference between the capacity and the actual birds, the only time we realise that the flock's been taken out is when the next one's going in the shed. That was clearly a period of turndown. So we can improve collectively as an industry the data we provide for ourselves if we actually all get on the job and get those passports in. And the other thing we've introduced here in the line version 7 is fundamental non-conformances. These don't apply, by the way, to farms. This is for packers. But at the moment, the rules are if you have a critical non-conformance on a farm, then you will be suspended until you put right whatever that problem is. In a packing centre at the moment, you are not suspended at the first instance of a critical non-conformance. That is not to help the packer, by the way. This was decided by the industry collectively because, of course, packers hold lots of producers' livelihoods in their hand. And what happens in a packing centre if you get a critical non-conformance is you go into what we call special measures, and you then have 3 unannounced audits at your cost over the next 3 months, and if that same error is found again, then you would be out. However, that's fine for sort of non-conformances like a date error, which we all know, an operator on a grading machine can make a mistake, and that could lead to a critical non-conformance. But what we've introduced is fundamental non-conformances, where this is something that couldn't happen by mistake. And specifically, this is handling non-lion egg in a lion packing centre. If that is ever found, bang, you're out, and that's it. And that's really quite important that people know that. One of the other issues that's worrying me at the minute, and it must be worrying everybody else, is feed cost volatility. You know the issues. We've got rising world population, currently 7 billion, estimated to go to 9 billion, is it, in 2050. Increasing affluence, which is increasing demand for meat, or chicken in particular, or chicken and pork, and therefore soya, and at the same time, global warming. And if you look at the history of feed costs, before about 2007, they were always fairly predictable between one season and the next, and fairly stable. And then all of a sudden, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had 3 massive spikes in feed cost movement. And I'm talking massive spikes, £100 a tonne difference. And I think all we can say as we go forward with these 3 drivers of population, is that we're going to be seeing more and more problems from resource scarcity and price volatility. The previous speaker said he might like to gamble on the markets. Well, I'm not so sure, because I think the gambles are going to just get absolutely disastrous for us and enormous. So what I'm really thinking about here is that what we need to start thinking about is some sort of change in pricing. Now, from a producer angle, you might want to think about having a producer contract with a feed clause, great. But you would only do it as a packer if we could have some sort of feed clause with the people we're selling our eggs to, and those things don't exist today. However, I think the more sensible purchasers of our eggs, and I'm not talking about the end consumers, I'm talking about the retailers and so on who buy our eggs, are beginning to see that maybe some sort of mechanism for having an adjustment through feed is actually going to be sensible for the long term, both for them and for us. Because they need suppliers, they need product on their shelves just as much as we need customers to sell it to. So I just put that one out for thought. I don't see anything happen immediately, but at least now 1 or 2 people are beginning to talk about things like this. So maybe 5 or 10 years, this is perhaps where we might be. So finally, just come back to where I started on what some of my thoughts on where we go forward. I haven't done a chart on the last two, which is good bird performance and farm efficiency. It goes without saying that good bird performance is important, and that's your part of the contract, that's what you can do. What we see, and I'm sort of looking back at eggs coming into packing operations, is far too much variation in yield. Colony yield is fairly consistent, and the standard deviation of performance is a lot less. Colony, you might get 330 eggs at 72, and the range might be 310 to 340, let's say. Free range, probably the average at 72 is something over 300, but we all know the range could be 260 to 340 again. And that's where there's an enormous amount of money, so you've got to get good bird performance. And the other thought that was in my mind is really on sort of farm efficiency and farm size. You'll see from what I was talking about that on the colony sector, there has been a forced consolidation happening because of legislation. It's not happening on the free range side. However, if you look forward, we've got some extra players in the market. I think we're going to have some competitive issues, so I think we're going to have a fairly tight market. So I don't see the sort of bumper profits for free range that we had for a few years ago, for example. And I think that means we have to look inwardly a little bit and look at our farm size. And what I'm sort of thinking about here is if you've only got, say, 4,000 or 5,000 birds, unless you've got some specialty market for that flock, then you've got to start thinking about maybe getting a little bit larger and a little bit more efficient. The only thing I would say, and this is just a personal point of view, and some might disagree with me, is that whilst I've seen some very large free-range farms, I've never seen successful, large, multi-age free-range farms. If I put my company hat on a minute, we had some big free-range farms. Initially they were fine, got good performance, then it all started to go sour. And the only way we've got out of it is make those farms smaller and make them single age. So on the one hand, whilst I would say think about your size, maybe think about getting a bit bigger, if you can, keep single age while you do it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.